Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. Before we begin today's attack report, I want to ask you to subscribe to the channel. Your support is very important to us, so please subscribe. Go ahead and leave a comment telling me which city you're watching from, and click the like button. All of this because the night was like any other in our quiet suburban neighborhood of Oakville, Missouri. I had gone to bed early, exhausted from a long day at work. The gentle hum of the air conditioner and the occasional distant bark of a neighbor's dog were the only sounds breaking the stillness of the warm summer night. I drifted off to sleep, blissfully unaware of the horror that was about to unfold. I'm not sure how long I had been asleep when it happened. A sound, so out of place and alien, jolted me awake. My eyes snapped open, and I bolted upright in bed, my heart immediately racing. For a moment I sat there in the darkness, straining my ears, wondering if I had imagined it. Then I heard it again. A scratching sound, faint at first, but growing steadily louder. It wasn't the familiar scratching of our family cat, Mr. Whiskers. No, this was something else entirely. Something larger, more forceful. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I realized with mounting horror that the sound was coming from just outside my bedroom door. I held my breath, listening intently. The scratching continued, becoming more frantic, more insistent. It sounded like claws or talons scraping against the wood with increasing urgency. "Hello?" I called out weakly, my voice barely above a whisper. "Is someone there?" No response came, just more scratching. Then a new sound joined the cacophony, a deep, guttural growl that sent shivers down my spine. It was unlike anything I had ever heard before. Not a dog, not a coyote, not even a bear. This was something else, something primal and terrifying. My mind raced with possibilities. Had a wild animal somehow gotten into the house? But how? And what kind of animal could make a sound like that? I frantically searched for my phone in the darkness, patting the nightstand blindly. My fingers brushed against the cool glass screen and I grabbed it, clutching it like a lifeline. The bright light from the display momentarily blinded me as I fumbled to unlock it. Just then, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. A shadow passed under the door, blocking the faint hallway light for a terrifying moment. Whatever was out there, it was big. Much bigger than any household pet or local wildlife I could think of. My hands trembling uncontrollably, I dialed 911. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Each ring seemed to stretch on for an eternity as the scratching and growling outside my door intensified. Come on," I muttered, willing someone to pick up. But instead of the reassuring voice of an emergency operator, I was met with an automated message. "We're sorry, but your call cannot be completed at this time. Please check your signal and try again." I pulled the phone away from my ear and stared at it in disbelief. No signal? How was that possible? We always had great reception in our house. The growling outside my door suddenly stopped, replaced by an even more terrifying sound. Sniffing, long, deep inhalations, as if the creature was trying to catch my scent. I held my breath, trying to make myself as small and quiet as possible. My eyes darted around the room, searching for something, anything I could use to defend myself. The baseball bat in my closet seemed miles away. The lamp on my nightstand was too flimsy to be of any use. The sniffing stopped, and for a moment, there was complete silence. I dared to hope that whatever it was had lost interest and moved on. Then, without warning, something slammed against my door with such force that the entire wall shook. I bit back a scream, clamping my hand over my mouth to stifle any sound. "Oh God," I whispered, tears beginning to form in my eyes. "Please, someone help me." But there was no one to hear my plea. My parents were out of town for the weekend, visiting my sister in college. I was alone in the house, alone with whatever monstrous thing was trying to get into my room. Another slam against the door, even harder this time. I could hear the wood starting to splinter. How much longer would it hold? I tried 911 again, praying for a signal. Nothing. In desperation, I opened my messaging app, hoping to send a text for help. But the spinning wheel just kept turning, unable to connect. The creature outside let out another bone-chilling growl, low and menacing. It was a sound of pure, animalistic rage and hunger. I knew with a certainty that chilled me to my core that if it got through that door, I was dead. My mind raced, trying to think of a way out. The window? But I was on the second floor, and the drop would likely break my leg if I tried to jump. Hide in the closet? But for how long? And what if it broke through and found me there, trapped with nowhere to run? Another slam against the door. The wood was definitely cracking now. I could see the door frame starting to splinter. In that moment, as I sat there paralyzed with fear, I realized that this might be my last night alive. That tomorrow, people would find my room in shambles, my body torn apart by some unknown beast. Would they ever know what happened? Would they believe it if I somehow survived to tell the tale? The growling intensified, becoming a continuous rumbling snarl of fury. Whatever was out there, it wasn't giving up. It wanted in, and it was going to get in, no matter what. I clutched my useless phone to my chest, tears streaming down my face. "Please," I whispered to no one in particular. "Please, if anyone can hear me, help me. Save me from this nightmare." But as the door gave another ominous crack, I knew that no help was coming. Whatever happened next, I was on my own. The relentless assault on my bedroom door had momentarily subsided, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. I sat there, frozen in fear, my back pressed against the headboard of my bed. The darkness of my room seemed to close in around me, suffocating in its intensity. I knew I couldn't just sit there waiting for whatever was outside to break in. I needed information. I needed to know what I was dealing with. With trembling hands, I reached for the bedside lamp, flicking it on. The sudden light made me squint, but it also gave me a small measure of comfort. Gathering what little courage I had left, I slowly swung my legs over the side of the bed. The carpet felt damp beneath my feet, and I realized I was drenched in cold sweat. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "Come on, Jake," I whispered to myself. "You can do this. Just take a look. It's probably nothing." But even as I said it, I knew I was lying to myself. The scratches on the door, the inhuman growls, this was far from nothing. I approached the door on shaky legs, my breath coming in short, rapid gasps. As I got closer, I could see the deep gouges in the wood, splinters sticking out at odd angles. Whatever had done this was incredibly strong. My hand hovered over the doorknob for a moment before I changed course, deciding instead to peer through the keyhole. I leaned in close, my eye lined up with the small opening, and held my breath. At first, I saw nothing but darkness. Then movement, a shadow shifting in the hallway. I squinted, trying to make out any details. Suddenly, two glowing red eyes appeared, staring directly at me through the keyhole. I stumbled backward, a scream catching in my throat. My foot caught on the edge of the rug and I fell hard, the back of my head slamming against the wooden floor. Stars exploded in my vision, but the adrenaline coursing through my veins dulled the pain. "Oh God, oh God," I muttered, scrambling backward on all fours, unable to take my eyes off the door. The creature on the other side let out a low, rumbling growl that seemed to vibrate through the floor. Then, to my horror, I saw the door handle begin to turn slowly. In that moment, a horrifying realization hit me. I had forgotten to lock the door. "No, no, no," I whispered, my voice rising in panic. "This can't be happening." The door handle continued to turn, achingly slow, as if the creature was savoring the moment. I knew I had only seconds to act. My eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape route or a weapon. The window was too far and I'd never make it in time. Then I spotted my closet. It wasn't much, but it was the only option I had. Without thinking, I launched myself towards the closet, yanking the door open and diving inside. I pulled the door shut behind me just as I heard my bedroom door crash open with a deafening bang. I huddled in the darkness of the closet, surrounded by hanging clothes and the smell of laundry detergent. Through the slats in the door, I could see slivers of my bedroom, illuminated by the bedside lamp. Heavy, inhuman footsteps prowled around my room. They were unlike anything I'd ever heard before, a mix between a wolf's padding and something much larger and heavier. The floorboards creaked under its weight. I struggled to control my breathing, pressing my hand over my mouth to muffle any sound. Tears streamed down my face as I watched the creature's shadow move across the room. It sniffed the air, letting out occasional low growls. I could hear it moving things around, knocking over my desk chair, pawing at my bed sheets. "Please," I mouthed silently, squeezing my eyes shut. "Please don't find me." The footsteps grew closer to the closet. I could hear the creature's heavy breathing, smell a scent like wet dog mixed with something metallic. Blood? My whole body trembled uncontrollably. Suddenly, a massive paw slammed against the closet door, causing me to bite down on my hand to keep from screaming. Claws raked down the wood, leaving deep gouges. The door shuddered under the impact, and I knew it wouldn't take much for the creature to break through. I pressed myself further back into the closet, burying myself under a pile of clothes. It was a futile gesture, but it was all I could do. The assault on the closet door stopped as abruptly as it had begun. For a moment there was silence. Then I heard a strange sound, like sniffing, but more intense, more purposeful. The creature was scenting the air, trying to locate me. I held my breath, my lungs burning with the effort. Seconds ticked by like hours. The sniffing grew closer, then farther away, then closer again. I could hear the creature circling the room, searching. Just when I thought I couldn't hold my breath any longer, a car alarm went off somewhere down the street. The sudden noise seemed to startle the creature. It let out a low, menacing growl, and then I heard those heavy footsteps racing out of my room and down the stairs. I remained frozen in place, hardly daring to breathe. Minutes passed, but I couldn't bring myself to move. What if it was a trick? What if the creature was waiting just outside? Eventually, the need for air forced me to take a shuddering breath. I strained my ears, listening for any sound of the creature's return, but all I could hear was the distant wail of the car alarm and my own ragged breathing. Slowly, cautiously, I pushed aside the clothes I had buried myself under. My entire body ached from being tensed for so long, and I was drenched in sweat. With trembling hands, I reached for the closet door. I paused, my hand on the handle. Did I dare to open it? What if the creature was still out there waiting? But I couldn't stay in this closet forever. I had to know. Taking a deep breath, I slowly pushed the door open, wincing at the slight creak of the hinges. I peeked out into my room, ready to slam the door shut at the first sign of danger. But my room was empty. The creature was gone. The evidence of its presence, however, was everywhere. My belongings were strewn about, my bed sheets torn to shreds. Deep claw marks scored the walls and floor. And there, caught in the splintered wood of my closet door, was a tuft of coarse, dark fur. I stumbled out of the closet on shaky legs, my mind reeling. What had just happened? What kind of animal could do this? And more importantly, where had it gone? As the adrenaline began to wear off, the reality of the situation started to sink in. I needed help. I needed to call the police, to warn someone about the creature that was now loose in our quiet suburban neighborhood. But as I reached for my phone, a chilling thought stopped me cold. Who would believe me? What would I even say? That a monster had broken into my house and tried to eat me. I looked around at the destruction in my room, at the very real evidence of the attack. Surely this would be enough to convince them. It had to be. With trembling fingers, I dialed 911, praying that this time the call would go through. As I waited for someone to pick up, I couldn't shake the feeling that this nightmare was far from over. The creature was still out there somewhere in the night. I huddled in the darkness of my closet, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure the creature could hear it. The smell of my own fear was suffocating in the confined space, mixing with the scent of laundry detergent and old sneakers. I tried to control my breathing, taking shallow, silent breaths through my mouth. From beyond the thin wooden door, I could hear the beast moving around my room. The sound of its sniffing was loud and deliberate, punctuated by low, rumbling growls that sent shivers down my spine. It was methodically searching the room, hunting for me. A loud crash made me jump. It sounded like my desk chair being knocked over. Then came the sound of ripping fabric. My bed sheets, I realized with a sickening feeling. The creature was tearing apart my room in its relentless search. "Please," I mouthed silently, squeezing my eyes shut. "Please don't find me." Suddenly the sound stopped. The silence that followed was almost worse than the noise. I strained my ears, trying to determine where in the room the creature was. Had it left? Was it waiting just outside the closet door? My questions were answered with terrifying abruptness as claws raked across the closet door mere inches from my face. I bit down hard on my lip to keep from screaming, tasting blood. The attack was so sudden and violent that splinters of wood showered over me. The creature knew I was in here. It had found me. Another slash of claws, and I could see moonlight filtering through the gouges in the door. The wood was starting to splinter under the relentless assault. I pressed myself further back into the closet, burying myself under a pile of clothes. It was a futile gesture, but it was all I could do. The beast let out a frustrated roar that shook the entire closet. I could smell its hot, rancid breath through the widening gaps in the door. Tears streamed down my face as I realized this might be my last moments alive. Just as I thought the door would give way, a new sound cut through the night. The shrill wail of a car alarm. The sudden noise seemed to startle the creature. Its attack on the closet door stopped abruptly. For a moment, there was silence. Then, I heard those heavy, inhuman footsteps bounding away. The bedroom door crashed open again, and I heard the creature thundering down the stairs. I remained frozen in place, hardly daring to breathe. Was it really gone? Or was this some kind of trick? I strained my ears, listening for any sign of the creature's return, but all I could hear was the distant car alarm and my own ragged breathing. Minutes ticked by, feeling like hours. My body ached from being tensed for so long, and I was drenched in cold sweat. Still, I didn't move. I couldn't bring myself to leave the relative safety of the closet. As time passed, the car alarm eventually stopped. The house fell into an eerie silence. I tried to gather my courage to leave the closet, but fear kept me rooted in place. What if the creature was still out there, waiting? I'm not sure how long I stayed there, huddled in the dark. It could have been minutes or hours. Time seemed to lose all meaning in the wake of the terror I'd experienced. Finally, the first rays of dawn began to filter through the shredded closet door. The soft light gave me a small measure of courage. Slowly, cautiously, I pushed aside the clothes I had buried myself under. With trembling hands, I reached for what remained of the closet door. I paused, my hand hovering over the splintered wood. Did I dare to open it? What if the creature was still out there? Taking a deep breath, I slowly pushed the door open, wincing at the creak of the damaged hinges. I peeked out into my room, ready to slam the remnants of the door shut at the first sign of danger. But my room was empty. The creature was gone. The evidence of its rampage, however, was everywhere. My belongings were strewn about, my bedsheets torn to shreds. Deep claw marks scored the walls and floor. The destruction was even worse than I had imagined. I stumbled out of the closet on shaky legs, my mind reeling. What had just happened? What kind of animal could do this? And more importantly, where had it gone? As I surveyed the damage, my eyes fell on something that made my blood run cold. There, caught in the splintered wood of my closet door, was a tuft of coarse, dark fur. Concrete evidence that what had happened was real, not some terrifying nightmare. With trembling fingers, I reached out and plucked the fur from the wood. It felt rough and wild in my hand, unlike any animal fur I'd ever felt before. I knew I should keep it as evidence, to prove to others what had happened here. But even as I thought this, a part of me knew that no one would believe my story. I looked out the window at the brightening sky. The neighbors' houses stood quiet and undisturbed, showing no signs of the terror that had unfolded in my room. How was that possible? Surely someone must have heard something. As the adrenaline began to wear off, exhaustion hit me like a physical force. I sank to the floor, my back against the wall, still clutching the tuft of fur in my hand. I knew I should call for help, try to explain what had happened, but in that moment, all I could do was sit there, staring at the destruction around me, trying to process the nightmare I had just lived through. The creature was gone, at least for now. But as I sat there in the early morning light, surrounded by the wreckage of my room, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. Whatever that thing was, wherever it had gone, I had a sickening certainty that it would be back. As the first rays of sunlight began to filter through my shredded curtains, I finally found the courage to fully emerge from my hiding place. The adrenaline that had kept me alert all night was wearing off, leaving me shaky and exhausted. But I couldn't rest yet. I had to assess the damage and make sure I was truly safe. I stepped out into what remained of my bedroom and my breath caught in my throat. The destruction was even worse than I had imagined. My bed was overturned, the mattress torn to shreds. Books and papers were strewn across the floor, many of them shredded beyond recognition. But what truly chilled me to the bone were the claw marks. Deep gouges scored the walls and floor, a testament to the incredible strength and ferocity of the creature that had invaded my home. This can't be real, I muttered to myself, running a trembling hand through my hair. This has to be some kind of nightmare. But the destruction around me was all too real. I could smell the musty odor of torn fabric and freshly splintered wood. This was no dream. A sudden thought jolted me out of my shocked stupor. My parents. Were they okay? Had the creature gotten to them? I raced out of my room and down the hallway, my heart pounding. "Mom! Dad!" I called out, my voice hoarse from fear and disuse. I burst into their bedroom expecting the worst. But to my surprise and relief, the room was untouched. The bed was neatly made, looking exactly as it had yesterday morning. On the nightstand, I spotted a folded piece of paper. With shaking hands, I picked it up and read, "Jake, we've gone to visit Aunt Sarah for the weekend. There's money for pizza in the kitchen drawer. Don't stay up too late playing video games. Love, Mom and Dad." I let out a hysterical laugh that was half sob. They were safe. They had no idea of the horror that had unfolded in their absence. But now I was faced with a new dilemma. How could I possibly explain what had happened? Dazed, I wandered back to my room, trying to think of what to do next. As I surveyed the damage once more, something caught my eye. Caught in the splintered wood of my closet door were tufts of coarse dark fur. My heart raced as I approached. This was evidence, proof that I hadn't imagined the whole thing. With trembling fingers, I carefully plucked the fur from the wood. It felt rough and wild in my hand, unlike any animal fur I'd ever felt before. I have to keep this safe, I muttered to myself. They'll have to believe me if I show them this. I found a small plastic bag in my desk drawer and carefully placed the fur inside, sealing it tightly. Then a wave of paranoia washed over me. What if the creature came back? I had to secure the house. I raced through each room, checking and double-checking every window and door. I pushed furniture in front of the more vulnerable entrances, my muscles straining with the effort. By the time I finished, sweat was pouring down my face, but I felt a little safer. As I completed my frantic fortification of the house, I noticed that dawn had fully broken. The neighborhood outside looked calm and peaceful, a stark contrast to the chaos within my home. I sank onto the living room couch, utterly exhausted but too terrified to sleep. I pulled out my phone, which I had retrieved from the wreckage of my room. My hands shook as I dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? A calm voice answered. I opened my mouth to speak, but suddenly found myself at a loss for words. How could I possibly explain what had happened? Hello? Is anyone there? The operator prompted. There was an animal attack, I finally managed to say. In my house. It destroyed my room. An animal attack inside your house? What kind of animal? I hesitated. I'm not sure. It was big, like a wolf, but bigger, much bigger. There was a pause on the other end of the line. When the operator spoke again, her voice had a note of skepticism. "Sir, are you sure about this? Are you safe now?" "Yes, I'm safe. It's gone now. But please, you have to send someone. You have to see this." "All right, we'll send an officer to check it out. Can you give me your address?" I provided my address, and the operator assured me that help would arrive soon. As I ended the call, I couldn't shake the feeling that they didn't really believe me, and so I waited. Every creak of the house, every distant dog bark made me jump. I clutched the bag of fur like a lifeline, praying it would be enough to convince them. As the morning wore on, exhaustion began to overtake me. My eyelids grew heavy, but I forced myself to stay awake. I couldn't let my guard down, not when that thing might still be out there. Just as I was about to nod off, a sharp knock at the door jolted me back to full alertness. My heart raced as I approached the door, peering through the peephole. 2 police officers stood on my porch looking impatient and slightly annoyed. This was it. The moment of truth. Would they believe me? Or would I be dismissed as some kind of lunatic? With a deep breath, I unlocked the door, ready to face whatever came next. But as I opened my mouth to speak, I realized with growing dread that I had no idea how to even begin explaining the nightmare I had just lived through. I opened the door with shaking hands, relief washing over me at the sight of the 2 police officers standing on my porch. Officer Johnson, a middle-aged man with a stern expression, and Officer Rodriguez, a younger woman with sharp eyes, both looked at me with a mixture of concern and skepticism. "Good morning, sir," Officer Johnson said. "We received a call about an animal attack." I nodded vigorously, my words tumbling out in a rush. Yes, please come in. You have to see this." It was unlike anything I've ever seen before. As they stepped inside, I led them towards my bedroom, recounting the events of the night. I woke up to this scratching sound, and then there was this growling. It was huge, like a wolf, but bigger, much bigger, and its eyes, they glowed red in the dark. Officer Rodriguez raised an eyebrow, exchanging a glance with her partner. "Red eyes, you say?" I nodded, my hands gesticulating wildly as I spoke. "I know it sounds crazy, but I swear it's true. Look, I'll show you the damage." We reached my bedroom, and I flung open the door, expecting gasps of shock from the officers. Instead, I was met with silence. I turned to see them surveying the room with furrowed brows. "As you can see," I said, gesturing to the overturned furniture and shredded bedding, "it tore through everything." Officer Johnson stepped further into the room, his eyes scanning the walls and floor. "These claw marks, they're quite extensive." "Exactly," I exclaimed, feeling a glimmer of hope that they might believe me. "No normal animal could do this." Officer Rodriguez was examining the window and door frame. "Mr. Thompson, I don't see any signs of forced entry. How do you think this animal got in?" My heart sank. I'm not sure. Maybe it came in through an open window downstairs, or maybe it can open doors." Even as I said it, I realized how ridiculous it sounded. The officers exchanged another look, this one tinged with growing doubt. "Wait," I suddenly remembered. "I have proof. I collected some of its fur. It was caught in the splintered wood of the closet door." I rushed to where I had left the plastic bag containing the fur, but to my horror it wasn't there. I began frantically searching the room, tossing aside debris and upending what little furniture remained intact. No, I muttered. "It was right here. I swear I put it right here." The officers watched my frenzied search with growing concern. Officer Johnson cleared his throat. "Mr. Thompson, perhaps you should sit down for a moment. You seem agitated." I spun around, desperation clear in my voice. "You have to believe me. There was fur. It was real. The creature was real." Officer Rodriguez approached me slowly, her voice gentle but firm. "Sir, we understand you've had a frightening experience, but we need to consider all possibilities here. Is there any chance that you might have imagined some of this?" "Imagined?" I repeated incredulously. Look around you. Does this look imagined to you? Officer Johnson interjected, his tone measured. The damage is real, certainly, but without any signs of forced entry or physical evidence of an animal. What are you saying? I demanded, my voice rising. That I did this myself? The officers exchanged another knowing look, and I felt my last hope of being believed slipping away. Mr. Thompson, Officer Rodriguez said carefully, have you been under any unusual stress lately? Or perhaps experimenting with any substances? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. No, I'm not on drugs, and I'm not crazy. There was a monster in my house last night, and it tried to kill me. Officer Johnson sighed, pulling out a notepad. All right, sir. We'll file a report about the property damage. In the meantime, I suggest you get some rest. Perhaps things will be clearer after you've had some sleep. As they prepared to leave, I overheard Officer Rodriguez speaking quietly into her radio. Dispatch, can you put in a call to animal control? There's been a report of a large dog in the area. Might be related to that missing pet case from last week. My heart sank. They didn't believe me. They thought this was all because of a dog. As the officers headed for the door, Officer Johnson turned to me one last time. Mr. Thompson, here's my card. If you remember anything else, or if you need to talk, please don't hesitate to call. I nodded numbly, watching as they walked down the driveway to their patrol car. As they drove away, I closed the door and leaned against it, sliding down to sit on the floor. Tears of frustration and fear welled up in my eyes. What was I going to do now? The creature was still out there, and no one believed me. I was alone with this terrifying knowledge, and the gnawing fear that it might come back. As I sat there, the morning sun streaming through the windows, I realized that this nightmare was far from over. The attack might have ended, but a new kind of horror was just beginning. The horror of knowing the truth and being utterly, completely alone with it. I glanced at the clock. It was only 9:30 a.m. The day stretched before me, long and daunting. I knew I should try to sleep, to recover from the traumatic night. But how could I close my eyes, knowing what was out there? With a heavy sigh, I pushed myself to my feet. I had to do something. If no one would believe me, I'd have to find proof on my own. I'd have to be ready for when it came back. Because deep down, I knew with chilling certainty that it would come back. And next time, I'd be prepared. The morning sun climbed higher in the sky as I sat at my computer, eyes burning from lack of sleep and hours of intense research. My fingers flew across the keyboard, searching for any information that could explain what I had encountered last night. Local wildlife reports, cryptozoology forums, even ancient folklore. I devoured it all, desperate for answers. Come on, I muttered, scrolling through yet another unhelpful web page. There has to be something. But everything I found fell short. Mountain lions, wolves, even bears. None of them matched the sheer size and ferocity of the creature that had invaded my home. And none of them explained those glowing red eyes that still haunted my thoughts. As the day wore on, my frustration grew. I was about to give up when a local news alert caught my eye. I clicked on the video, and a grim-faced reporter appeared on screen. In a disturbing development, several farms on the outskirts of town have reported brutal attacks on their livestock. The reporter said, authorities are baffled by the nature of the wounds, which seem inconsistent with any known predator in the area. My heart raced as I leaned closer to the screen. The reporter continued. Farmer John Miller described the scene as a bloodbath. Here's what he had to say. The video cut to an older man in overalls, his face etched with worry. I've been farming these lands for 40 years, he said, and I've never seen anything like it. Whatever did this, it wasn't natural. The claw marks were huge, and the strength it must have taken to tear apart a full-grown bull like that, it's just not possible. I sat back, my mind reeling. This had to be connected to what I saw. It just had to be. Without really thinking it through, I grabbed my car keys and headed out. I needed to see for myself. As I drove towards the edge of town, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, I tried to rationalize what I was doing. It was dangerous, probably stupid, but I couldn't shake the feeling that answers were out there, just beyond my reach. The paved road gave way to gravel, then dirt as I approached the forest that bordered our town. I parked at the edge of a clearing and got out, the hair on the back of my neck standing up as I surveyed the silent trees. That's when I saw them. In a patch of mud near the tree line, there were footprints. But these were no ordinary animal tracks. They were massive, easily twice the size of my hand with clear claw marks at the tips of each toe. "Oh my God," I whispered, crouching down for a closer look. My hand hovered over the print, not quite daring to touch it. This was real. This was proof. A twig snapped behind me and I whirled around, my heart in my throat. But it was just an old man in hunting gear looking at me curiously. "You all right there, son?" he asked, his voice gruff but not unkind. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I pointed at the tracks, my voice shaking slightly. "Do you see these? Have you ever seen anything like this before?" The hunter ambled over, squinting down at the prints. He chuckled, shaking his head. "Ah, you city folks. Always getting spooked by nothing. It's probably just a bear print, distorted by the mud, or maybe a mountain lion." But the size," I protested. "And look at the claw marks." He patted me on the shoulder, still chuckling. "Listen, boy, I've been hunting these woods for 50 years. There's nothing out here that isn't in the guidebooks. You're letting your imagination run wild." I wanted to argue, to make him understand, but I could see the dismissal in his eyes. It was the same look the police officers had given me. No one was going to believe me. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the trees, I reluctantly headed back to my car. The old hunter's words echoed in my mind, but they did nothing to quell the fear growing in the pit of my stomach. The drive home felt longer than it should have. Every shadow on the road seemed to move. Every rustle in the roadside bushes made me flinch. By the time I pulled into my driveway, twilight had fallen, and the streetlights were flickering to life. As I got out of the car, a chill ran down my spine. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. My eyes darted around, searching the darkening yards and hedges, but I saw nothing. "Get a grip," I muttered to myself, fumbling with my keys as I approached the front door. "You're just paranoid." But as I stepped inside and locked the door behind me, I couldn't help but feel that I had made a terrible mistake. I had gone looking for answers, but all I had found was more questions. And now, as night fell once again, I couldn't shake the terrifying certainty that I had drawn the attention of something I didn't understand. Something that was now watching, waiting for its moment to strike. I leaned against the door, my heart pounding. The house felt different now, no longer a sanctuary but a fragile shell that had already proven no match for the creature's strength. Every creak of settling wood, every whisper of wind outside the windows, set my nerves on edge. As I moved through the darkened rooms, checking locks and drawing curtains, I tried to make sense of everything I had learned. The livestock attacks, the massive paw prints, the dismissive attitudes of everyone I had spoken to. It all swirled in my mind, pieces of a puzzle I couldn't quite fit together. One thing was clear, though. Whatever had attacked me last night, whatever had left those prints in the mud, it was still out there. And somehow, I knew that this was far from over. I settled into an armchair in the living room, facing the front door. Sleep was out of the question. As the night deepened around me, I sat in tense silence, ears straining for any sound out of place. And all the while, that feeling of being watched persisted, an invisible weight pressing down on me from all sides. The long night ahead stretched before me, full of shadows and unspoken threats. Whatever happened next, I knew I had to be ready, because if there was one thing I was certain of, it was that the creature would be back. And next time, I might not be so lucky. The glow of my laptop screen was the only light in the room as I pored over yet another cryptozoology forum. My eyes burned with exhaustion, but I couldn't stop. I had to find answers, had to understand what was happening to me. The tick of the clock on the wall seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet house. I blinked, trying to focus on the words swimming before me. A post about a creature in the Pacific Northwest caught my attention, and I leaned in closer, my heart racing. Large wolf-like beast, glowing eyes, unnatural strength. It sounded so familiar, so close to what I had experienced. But as I read on, my excitement faded. It was just another hoax, another campfire story. I sighed, rubbing my eyes. There has to be something, I muttered to myself. It can't all be make-believe. I don't remember closing my eyes, but suddenly I was jerking awake, my heart pounding. The laptop had gone to sleep, its screen dark. The house was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that feels almost tangible, pressing in on you from all sides. How long had I been out? I fumbled for my phone, squinting at the bright display. 2:17 a.m. I'd been asleep for hours. As I set the phone down, a chill ran down my spine. Something felt off. The air seemed heavier, charged with an unseen tension. I held my breath, straining my ears for any sound out of place. Nothing. Just the usual creaks and settling noises of an old house. But still, that feeling persisted, a nameless dread clawing at the edges of my mind. I was about to get up, to check the locks again, when it happened. With a soft whine and a click, the power went out. The sudden darkness was absolute, suffocating. No, 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 I whispered, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the silence. I reached for my phone again, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. And then I heard it. A low, rumbling growl coming from just outside the house. It was a sound I'd hoped never to hear again, a sound that sent icy tendrils of fear coursing through my veins. It was back. I scrambled to my feet, nearly tripping over the coffee table in my panic. Where was my flashlight? I'd left it. Where? My mind raced, trying to remember through the fog of terror. The growl came again, closer this time. And then another sound, the scrape of claws against wood. It was trying to get in. My fingers finally closed around the flashlight, tucked between the couch cushions. I flicked it on, the beam cutting through the darkness like a knife. I swept the light around the room, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Everything looked normal, untouched. But then I saw it. On the living room window, illuminated by the flashlight's beam, long, deep scratch marks were appearing. Slowly, methodically, as if some unseen force was carving them into the glass from the outside. I stumbled backward, a scream caught in my throat. This couldn't be happening. Not again. The scratching grew more frenzied, the glass creaking under the pressure. And then, with a sound like a gunshot, the window shattered inward. In that moment, caught in the flashlight's glare, I saw it. Matted fur, gleaming teeth, eyes that glowed with an unholy red light. It was bigger than I remembered, its massive form barely fitting through the broken window. Time seemed to slow down. I could see every detail with horrifying clarity, the saliva dripping from its jaws, the muscles rippling under its coat, the wicked curve of its claws. And those eyes, those terrible eyes, fixed on me with a predatory intelligence that was all too human. Then, as suddenly as it had slowed, time snapped back into normal speed. The creature let out a bone-chilling howl and lunged forward. I didn't think. I ran. My feet pounded against the floor as I raced for the stairs, the creature's hot breath practically on my heels. I could hear it behind me, claws scrabbling against the hardwood, jaws snapping at empty air. I took the stairs 2 at a time, my lungs burning, my legs screaming in protest. Behind me, I heard the splintering of wood as the beast's massive form collided with the banister. I reached the top of the stairs and sprinted down the hallway to my bedroom. I could feel it right behind me, so close I was sure at any moment I'd feel those teeth sink into my flesh. With a final burst of desperate energy, I flung myself into my room and slammed the door shut. My trembling hands fumbled with the lock, finally managing to click it into place just as something massive slammed into the other side. The door shuddered in its frame, the wood creaking ominously. I stumbled backward, my back hitting the far wall as I stared in horror at the door. It wouldn't hold. It couldn't hold. Not against that kind of strength. Another slam, and I saw the wood begin to splinter around the hinges. Claws raked down the other side, leaving deep gouges in the paint. I looked around frantically, searching for anything I could use as a weapon, any way to escape. But there was nothing. I was trapped. As the assault on the door continued, a strange calm settled over me. This was it. This was how it would end. In my own bedroom, cornered by a monster that shouldn't exist, I closed my eyes, waiting for the inevitable. The sounds of splintering wood filled my ears, growing louder and louder until... silence. I opened my eyes, blinking in confusion. The attack had stopped as suddenly as it had begun. I held my breath, straining to hear any sound from the other side of the door. Nothing. Just the rapid pounding of my own heart. Minutes passed, feeling like hours. Still, nothing. Had it given up? Left to find easier prey? Or was this just another trick, waiting for me to lower my guard? I didn't move from my spot against the wall, eyes fixed on the battered door. Dawn would come eventually. I just had to survive until then. Just a few more hours. But as I settled in for the long wait, a chilling thought occurred to me. Even if I made it through the night, what then? The creature was still out there. And now, it knew where I lived. This nightmare was far from over. In fact, I realized with growing dread it might only be the beginning. The silence was deafening. My ragged breathing and the pounding of my heart were the only sounds in the dark room. I stood frozen against the wall, eyes fixed on the battered door, waiting for the next onslaught. It came without warning. Wham! The door shuddered violently in its frame, wood splintering around the hinges. I flinched, a strangled gasp escaping my lips. Wham! 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 Each impact was like a thunderclap reverberating through my bones. I could see the door bowing inward, the lock straining to hold. "This isn't happening," I whispered, my voice trembling. "This can't be real." But the relentless assault on the door was all too real. I could hear the creature's frustrated growls between impacts, its hot breath whistling through the widening cracks in the wood. I had to do something. I couldn't just stand here and wait for it to break through. With shaking hands, I grabbed the desk chair and wedged it under the doorknob. It wouldn't hold for long, but maybe it would buy me a few precious seconds. Think, I hissed to myself, frantically scanning the room for anything I could use as a weapon. My eyes landed on the letter opener on my desk, a graduation gift from my parents, its silver handle gleaming dully in the faint moonlight filtering through the window. I lunged for it, my fingers closing around the cool metal just as the door gave an ominous crack. Crash! The door exploded inward in a shower of splinters, the chair tumbling uselessly aside. And there, framed in the doorway, was a nightmare made flesh. It was even more terrifying up close. Easily 7 feet tall at the shoulder, with matted gray fur and muscles that rippled with inhuman strength. But it was the eyes that paralyzed me. Glowing red orbs filled with a primal hunger and an intelligence that had no place in an animal's gaze. For a heartbeat that seemed to stretch into eternity, we stared at each other, me, a trembling human clutching a letter opener like it was Excalibur. And it, a monster that shouldn't exist, its jaws dripping with saliva, claws gouging deep furrows in my hardwood floor. Then the moment shattered. With a bone-chilling howl, the creature lunged at me. I caught a glimpse of yellowed fangs, each as long as my finger, before I instinctively threw myself to the side. I felt the rush of air as its massive form sailed past me, claws raking across my back. Pain exploded along my spine, but adrenaline kept me moving. I stumbled, nearly falling, but managed to spin around to face the beast. It had crashed into my desk, sending books and papers flying. As it turned to face me, lips pulled back in a snarl, I knew I had only seconds before it attacked again. "Come on, you bastard," I growled. surprising myself with the venom in my voice. Fear had given way to a desperate, primal rage. If I was going to die, I wasn't going down without a fight. The creature's muscles bunched, preparing to spring. Time seemed to slow down. I could see every detail. The saliva dripping from its jaws, the way its fur stood on end, the flex of its powerful legs. It leaped. I don't know if it was skill, luck, or pure animal instinct, but somehow I timed it perfectly. As the beast sailed towards me, jaws open wide to clamp around my throat, I thrust upward with the letter opener. The silver blade sank deep into the creature's shoulder, just below its neck. Hot blood gushed over my hand as the beast's momentum carried it into me, knocking us both to the floor. Its agonized howl was deafening, so close it made my ears ring. I felt its claws raking at me, tearing through my shirt, but the pain was distant, unimportant. With a strength born of desperation, I twisted the letter opener, driving it deeper. The creature thrashed wildly, its massive body pinning me down, suffocating me with its weight and the overwhelming stench of wet fur and blood. Just when I thought I couldn't hold on any longer, when my lungs were screaming for air and my vision was starting to darken at the edges, the weight suddenly lifted. The beast reared back, still howling in pain and fury. Before I could react, it whirled around and hurled itself at the window. Glass shattered, raining down in a glittering cascade as the creature disappeared into the night. I lay there on the floor, gasping for breath, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. The cool night air drifted in through the broken window, carrying with it the fading sounds of the creature's retreat. Slowly, painfully, I pushed myself up to a sitting position. My entire body ached, and I could feel warm blood trickling down my back where the beast's claws had caught me. "I did it," I whispered, my voice hoarse and shaky. I actually heard it. But as the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion and throbbing pain, I realized this was far from over. I had driven it off, yes, but I had also wounded it. And wounded animals were often the most dangerous. I staggered to my feet, wincing at the pain in my back. I needed to get help, needed medical attention. But how could I explain this? Who would believe me? As I stumbled towards the bathroom to assess my injuries, a chilling thought stopped me in my tracks. The letter opener, my only piece of evidence covered in the creature's blood, was gone. It must have still been embedded in the beast's shoulder when it leaped out the window. I let out a bitter laugh that was half sob. Once again, I was left with no proof. Nothing but my own battered body and a wrecked house to show for my encounter with the impossible. Dawn was breaking, pale light creeping through the broken window. I had survived the night, but at what cost? And what would happen when night fell again? As I caught sight of my reflection in the bathroom mirror, pale, blood-smeared, eyes wild with fear and exhaustion, I knew one thing for certain. This was far from over. The beast would be back. The world was a blur of pain and confusion. I lay on the floor of my destroyed bedroom, the cool night air seeping in through the shattered window. My ears rang from the creature's deafening howls, and every breath sent shards of agony through my battered body. How long had I been lying here? Minutes? Hours? Time seemed to have lost all meaning in the wake of the attack. In the distance, I heard sirens. The sound grew louder, piercing through the fog in my mind. Someone must have heard the commotion and called for help. I tried to move, to sit up, but my body refused to cooperate. "Help," I croaked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Please, someone help me." The sirens were close now, their wailing drowning out everything else. Flashing lights painted my room in surreal shades of red and blue. I heard car doors slamming, voices shouting. "Up here!" I managed to call out louder this time. "I'm up here!" Heavy footsteps thundered up the stairs. My bedroom door, already hanging off its hinges, crashed open. 2 police officers burst in, guns drawn, followed closely by paramedics. "Oh my God," one of the officers breathed, taking in the scene of destruction. I tried to focus on their faces, but my vision swam. "The monster," I gasped. It was here. It attacked me. The paramedics were at my side in an instant, their hands gentle as they examined me. "Sir, can you tell me your name?" one of them asked, her voice calm and professional. "Jake," I mumbled. "Jake Thompson. Please, you have to believe me. There was a creature, like a giant wolf. It tried to kill me." The paramedics exchanged glances. "Jake, you're in shock," the male paramedic said soothingly. "We're going to take care of you, okay? Just try to stay calm." As they worked, attaching monitors and applying pressure to my wounds, I could hear the police officers talking in low voices. No signs of forced entry downstairs. "Looks like some kind of animal attack, but I've never seen anything like this. Check the surrounding area, it can't have gone far." I wanted to scream at them, to make them understand that this wasn't just some animal. But exhaustion was pulling me under, the adrenaline that had kept me going finally giving out. The next few hours passed in a haze. I was vaguely aware of being lifted onto a stretcher, of the bumpy ride in the ambulance, of bright lights and concerned faces in the emergency room. Through it all, I tried to tell my story, to make them understand what had happened. "A werewolf," I heard one of the doctors mutter. Poor kid must have hit his head pretty hard. "I'm not crazy," I insisted weakly. "It was real. You have to believe me." But I could see it in their eyes. They didn't believe a word of it. As the sun began to rise, casting a pale glow through the hospital room window, I found myself cleaned up, stitched, and bandaged. The physical evidence of my ordeal was clear. Deep lacerations on my back, bruises blooming across my body, a mild concussion. But the true horror of what I'd experienced seemed to have no place in this sterile, rational environment. A knock at the door startled me out of my thoughts. A doctor entered, followed by my parents. The relief on their faces quickly gave way to confusion and concern as they took in my battered appearance. "Jake, honey, what happened?" my mom asked, rushing to my bedside. "We got back from Aunt Sarah's and the police called us." I opened my mouth to explain, but the doctor cut in smoothly. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, your son has been through a traumatic experience. He's suffering from a concussion and various lacerations consistent with an animal attack." "An animal attack?" my dad repeated incredulously. "In our house?" I couldn't stay silent any longer. "It wasn't just an animal, Dad. It was something else. Something huge like a wolf, but wrong. It broke into the house. It tried to kill me." The room fell silent. I could see the doubt in their eyes, the worry. My mom reached out and patted my hand gently. "Sweetheart, you've been through a lot. Maybe you're not remembering things clearly." "No," I said, more forcefully than I intended. "I know what I saw. Why won't anyone believe me?" The doctor cleared his throat. "Jake, given the nature of your injuries and the unusual aspects of your account, we'd like to recommend a psychiatric evaluation. Just as a precaution, you understand?" I felt like I was drowning. They thought I was crazy. Everyone thought I was crazy. But I knew what I had seen, what I had fought. The creature was real, and it was still out there. As my parents spoke in hushed tones with the doctor, I stared out the window at the bright morning sky. The night's horrors seemed distant in the cheerful sunlight, like a bad dream fading upon waking. But the ache in my body and the fear gnawing at my gut told me it had been all too real. And somewhere out there, licking its wounds, was a monster that knew where I lived, that had tasted my blood, a monster that I was certain would come for me again. As the day wore on, filled with tests and questions and worried looks, one thought kept circling in my mind. When night fell again, would I be ready? And if the creature returned, would anyone believe me before it was too late? The sun began its slow descent towards the horizon, and with each passing minute, my dread grew. The hospital room had become a prison of disbelief and doubt. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those glowing red orbs, heard that bone-chilling growl. But when I opened them, All I saw were the concerned faces of doctors and my parents, their eyes filled with worry and skepticism. After what felt like an eternity, but was really just a few days, I was finally released. As we drove home, the world outside the car window seemed alien, too normal after the horror I'd experienced. "You feeling okay, son?" my dad asked, glancing at me in the rearview mirror. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. How could I explain that every shadow made me flinch, that every dog bark sent my heart racing? As we pulled into our driveway, I saw the police tape had been removed. The broken window was boarded up, waiting for repair. It all looked so ordinary. Officer Johnson was waiting for us, his face a mask of professional concern. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, Jake," he greeted us. "I just wanted to update you on the case before you settled back in." My heart leapt. Maybe they'd found something, some evidence that would prove I wasn't crazy. But as Officer Johnson spoke, that hope died a quick death. "We've concluded our investigation," he said. "Based on the evidence, we believe this was a case of vandalism that got out of hand. Probably some local kids who broke in, got spooked, and tore up the place trying to get out." But what about the claw marks?" I protested. "The fur? The blood?" Officer Johnson's expression softened. "Son, I know you believe you saw something unusual, but trauma can play tricks on the mind. We found no evidence of any animal larger than a raccoon, and certainly nothing that matches your description." I opened my mouth to argue further, but my mom's hand on my arm stopped me. "Thank you, officer," she said quietly. "We appreciate all you've done." As Officer Johnson left, I felt like screaming. How could they not see? How could they not believe? The next few days were a blur of repair work and hushed conversations. I overheard my parents discussing therapy options, debating whether to transfer me to a different school. They thought I was suffering from PTSD, that I'd invented the creature as a way to cope with a traumatic break-in. But I knew the truth, and I became obsessed with proving it. I scoured every inch of my room, the hallway, the broken window. I searched online for similar attacks, for any mention of oversized wolves or red-eyed beasts. I even snuck out one night to check the forest edge for tracks, though the memory of those glowing eyes kept me from venturing too far. Nothing. There was nothing. It was as if the creature had never existed, had melted away like a nightmare in the morning light. But the scars on my back and the terror in my heart told a different story. Sleep became my enemy. Every night I'd jolt awake, drenched in sweat, the echo of savage growls ringing in my ears. In my dreams, I relived the attack over and over, each time ending with those massive jaws closing around my throat. One particularly bad night, I found myself standing by my newly repaired bedroom window, staring out into the darkness. The moon was full, casting an eerie glow over the quiet neighborhood. It was real. I whispered to myself, pressing my forehead against the cool glass. I know it was real. And then I heard it. A howl, distant but unmistakable, echoing from the direction of the forest. It was a sound that didn't belong in our suburban world, a sound that sent icy fingers of dread crawling up my spine. I stumbled back from the window, my heart pounding. It was still out there, waiting, watching. "Jake?" My mom's voice called softly from the hallway. "Are you okay?" I heard a noise. I turned to see her standing in the doorway, her face etched with worry. For a moment I considered telling her about the howl, about the certainty that had settled in my gut, but I knew she wouldn't believe me. No one would. "I'm fine, Mom," I lied, forcing a smile. "Just couldn't sleep." She nodded, unconvinced but unwilling to push. "Try to get some rest, sweetie. Things will look better in the morning." As she closed the door, I turned back to the window. The night was silent now, but I knew what I'd heard. The creature was out there, and somehow I knew it wasn't finished with me. I climbed back into bed, but sleep eluded me. My mind raced, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. Everything I knew to be true, but couldn't prove. The attack had been real. The creature, whatever it was was real, and it was still out there. As the first light of dawn began to creep across the sky, I made a decision. I couldn't just sit around waiting for it to come back, for it to hurt me or my family. I had to do something. I had to find proof, had to make people believe me. But how? Where could I even start? I grabbed a notebook from my desk and began to write, jotting down everything I could remember about the creature, about the attack. Every detail, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant. As I wrote, a plan began to form in my mind. It was risky, perhaps even foolish, but I couldn't just pretend it never happened. I couldn't live in fear, jumping at every shadow and sound. I had to find answers. I had to find proof. And as the new day dawned, bringing with it a false sense of safety, I knew one thing for certain. This was far from over. The creature was out there, and one way or another I was going to prove it. Little did I know my determination to uncover the truth would lead me down a path far darker and more dangerous than I could have ever imagined. The crisp mountain air filled my lungs as I set out on what was supposed to be a routine solo hike through the Appalachian Mountains. Little did I know that this day would change my life forever, leaving me with scars both physical and mental that I still struggle to comprehend. I had been planning this trip for weeks, meticulously checking my gear and studying the trail maps. The weather forecast had promised clear skies and mild temperatures, perfect conditions for a day-long trek. As I stepped onto the trail, the morning sun filtered through the canopy of leaves above, dappling the forest floor with golden light. The peaceful silence was broken only by the crunch of fallen leaves beneath my boots and the occasional chirp of a distant bird. About 2 hours into my hike, I noticed the first signs that something was off. The wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of rain. Dark clouds began to gather overhead, casting ominous shadows across the landscape. I quickened my pace, hoping to reach the next designated campsite before the storm hit. Damn it, I muttered to myself, fumbling with my backpack to retrieve my rain jacket. So much for the reliable forecast. The first drops of rain began to fall as I zipped up my jacket. Within minutes, it had escalated into a full-blown downpour. The trail quickly became slick with mud, making each step treacherous. I knew I needed to find shelter fast. As if answering my unspoken prayer, I spotted a dark opening in the rocky hillside to my right. Squinting through the rain, I realized it was the entrance to a cave. Without hesitation, I veered off the trail and made a beeline for it. "Hello?" I called out as I approached the cave entrance, my voice barely audible over the pounding rain. "Anyone in there?" Silence greeted me. Relieved to have found refuge but wary of potential wildlife, I cautiously stepped inside. The temperature dropped noticeably as I moved deeper into the cave, away from the storm raging outside. I fumbled for the flashlight in my backpack, its beam cutting through the oppressive darkness. As my eyes adjusted, I realized I was standing in what appeared to be Blackwater Cave, a landmark I had read about in my trail guide. It was supposed to be a minor attraction, nothing more than a shallow recess in the mountainside. But as I shone my flashlight further into the cavern, I saw that it extended much deeper than I had anticipated. Curiosity got the better of me. With the storm showing no signs of letting up, I decided to explore a bit further. The beam of my flashlight danced across the rough stone walls, revealing intricate patterns of mineral deposits. But as I moved deeper into the cave, something else caught my eye. Long, jagged scratches marred the cave walls at irregular intervals. They looked far too deep and deliberate to be natural formations. A chill ran down my spine as I traced one particularly deep set of gouges with my fingertips. "What the hell could have made these?" I whispered, my words echoing softly in the cavern. That's when I heard it, a sound that made my blood run cold. A low, rumbling growl emanated from the depths of the cave, followed by the unmistakable sound of heavy, labored breathing. I froze, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure whatever was in there with me could hear it. Slowly I began to back away, keeping my flashlight trained on the darkness ahead. "Hello?" I called out again, my voice trembling. "Is someone there?" The only response was another growl, louder this time, accompanied by the scraping of claws against stone. Whatever it was getting closer. Panic seized me. I turned and ran, stumbling over loose rocks in my haste to reach the cave entrance. The sound of pursuit echoed behind me, spurring me on despite the burning in my lungs and the ache in my legs. I burst out of the cave and back into the rain, not daring to look back. The storm was still raging, but I no longer cared about getting wet. I just needed to put as much distance between myself and that thing as possible. As I ran, my foot caught on an exposed tree root. I went down hard, my chin slamming into the muddy ground. Dazed, I rolled onto my back, blinking rain out of my eyes. That's when I saw it, silhouetted against the stormy sky, perched on a boulder at the cave entrance, was a creature straight out of a nightmare. It was vaguely humanoid in shape, but much larger, its body covered in matted fur. Its eyes glowed an unnatural yellow in the gloom, fixed directly on me. But it was the creature's face that would haunt me for years to come, a horrifying blend of human and wolf features, its muzzle pulled back in a snarl to reveal rows of razor-sharp teeth. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I could only stare in abject terror as the creature. The only word my mind could conjure was werewolf, tensed, preparing to lunge. In that moment, a blinding flash of lightning split the sky, followed immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. The sudden light and noise seemed to startle the creature. It hesitated, shaking its massive head as if disoriented. That hesitation saved my life. I scrambled to my feet and ran faster than I ever had before. Branches whipped at my face and arms as I crashed through the underbrush, no longer caring about staying on the trail. All that mattered was putting distance between myself and that monstrous creature. I don't know how long I ran. It could have been minutes or hours. The adrenaline coursing through my veins dulled all sense of time and fatigue. Eventually, I stumbled upon a small clearing and collapsed, my lungs burning as I gasped for air. As I lay there, the rain gradually subsiding to a gentle drizzle, the full weight of what I'd experienced began to sink in. I had seen something impossible, something that shouldn't exist outside of movies and folklore. Yet the terror I felt was all too real. I gingerly touched my chin, wincing at the pain. My hand came away bloody. In the fading light of day, I could see numerous cuts and scratches on my arms from my frantic flight through the forest. But I was alive, and for now, that was all that mattered. As the last of the adrenaline wore off, exhaustion set in. I knew I needed to find help, to get off this mountain and back to civilization. But the thought of moving, of potentially running into that creature again, paralyzed me with fear. I huddled against the base of a large tree, wrapping my arms around myself in a futile attempt to stop shaking. As darkness fell, the forest came alive with unfamiliar sounds. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves sent a fresh wave of panic through me. Sleep was impossible. I could only sit and wait for dawn, praying that the nightmare I had witnessed was somehow just a product of my imagination. But deep down I knew the truth. The scratches on my body and the vivid memory of those glowing eyes were all too real. Whatever I had encountered in Blackwater Cave was out there, somewhere in the darkness, and as the long night wore on, one thought kept repeating in my mind. How was I ever going to explain this to anyone without sounding completely insane? The darkness of the cave seemed to press in on me from all sides, my flickering flashlight barely penetrating the inky blackness. I had ventured further into Blackwater Cave than I'd intended, driven by a mixture of curiosity and the need to escape the raging storm outside. Now, as I stumbled deeper into its twisting passages, I was beginning to regret my decision. The beam of my flashlight danced erratically across the rough stone walls. I could hear water dripping somewhere in the distance, the sound echoing ominously through the cavern. My breath came in short, ragged gasps, visible in the cold, damp air. Get a grip, I muttered to myself, trying to steady my nerves. It's just a cave. Nothing to be afraid of. But even as I spoke those words, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The strange scratches I'd noticed earlier seemed more numerous here, deep gouges in the rock that couldn't have been made by any normal animal. I paused to check my phone, hoping against hope that I might have a signal. Nothing. Of course. I was on my own down here. That's when I saw them. 2 pinpricks of yellow light, gleaming in the darkness beyond my flashlight's reach. At first, I thought I was imagining things, a trick of the light perhaps. But as I stared, transfixed, I realized with growing horror that I was looking at a pair of eyes. A chill ran down my spine, rooting me to the spot. Those weren't the reflective eyes of a cave-dwelling creature. They were intelligent, predatory, and fixed directly on me. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. "Is someone there?" The only response was a low, rumbling growl that seemed to vibrate through the very rock beneath my feet. It was a sound unlike anything I'd ever heard before. Not quite animal, not quite human. It spoke to some primal part of my brain, screaming danger. I took an involuntary step backward, my foot slipping on the damp cave floor. As I stumbled, my flashlight beam swept across the source of those eyes, and for a split second I caught a glimpse of something that defied explanation. Matted fur, dark and coarse, covered a massive frame that seemed to blend the worst aspects of man and beast. Muscles rippled beneath that shaggy coat, tensed and ready to spring. But it was the claws that seared themselves into my memory, curved, yellowed things that looked capable of rending flesh from bone with terrifying ease. Time seemed to stand still as my mind struggled to process what I was seeing. This couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of hallucination, a trick of the light and my overstressed imagination. But the growl that filled the cavern was all too real, snapping me back to the present with brutal clarity. "Oh God," I whispered, my voice barely audible even to my own ears. "Oh God, oh God, oh God." Adrenaline surged through my system, my fight-or-flight response kicking into overdrive. In that moment, there was only one thought in my mind: run. I spun on my heel and bolted, not caring which direction I was going as long as it was away from that thing. My flashlight beam bounced wildly as I ran, casting crazy shadows that only added to my panic. I could hear the creature behind me, its growls growing louder as it gave chase. The sound of claws scraping against stone echoed through the passage, spurring me to even greater speed. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like lead, but pure terror kept me moving. "Help!" I screamed, knowing it was futile but unable to stop myself. "Somebody help me!" I rounded a corner at full speed, nearly losing my footing on the slick cave floor. As I regained my balance, I saw something that made my heart leap. A narrow crevice in the cave wall, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Without hesitation, I lunged for the opening. Sharp edges of rock tore at my clothes and skin as I forced my way into the crevice, ignoring the pain in my desperation to escape. I had barely made it through when the creature slammed into the rock face behind me. The impact shook loose a shower of debris, filling the air with choking dust. I pressed myself as far back into the crevice as I could, my heart pounding so hard I was sure it would burst from my chest. A massive clawed hand thrust into the opening, raking the air mere inches from my face. I could smell its breath, hot and fetid, reeking of decay. Another swipe of those deadly claws sent sparks flying as they scraped against the rock. I squeezed my eyes shut, certain that at any moment those claws would find their mark. But the crevice was too narrow for the creature to reach me. After what felt like an eternity, it withdrew its arm with a frustrated roar that shook the very foundations of the cave. I didn't dare move. I barely dared to breathe. I could hear the creature pacing outside my narrow sanctuary, occasionally throwing itself against the rock in an attempt to reach its prey. Each impact sent tremors through the stone, showering me with dust and small pebbles. Time lost all meaning as I huddled in that crevice, my body shaking uncontrollably. My flashlight had been dropped in the chase, leaving me in near total darkness. The only light came from the faint glow of those terrible yellow eyes, visible through the narrow opening whenever the creature passed by. Eventually, the sounds of the creature's movements began to grow fainter. It let out one final, bone-chilling howl that echoed through the cavern before silence descended. I don't know how long I stayed there, afraid to move, afraid to even think about what I had seen. My mind kept replaying that brief glimpse of matted fur and razor-sharp claws, trying to make sense of something that defied all logic. When I finally gathered the courage to peer out of the crevice, the cave beyond was dark and still. My flashlight lay on the ground nearby, its beam pointing uselessly at the cavern wall. With trembling hands, I retrieved it, half expecting the creature to materialize out of the shadows at any moment. But the cave remained silent. Whatever I had encountered seemed to have moved on, at least for now. As the immediate danger passed, the reality of my situation began to sink in. I was lost in a maze-like cave system, with no idea how to get back to the entrance. And somewhere in the darkness, a monster straight out of nightmare was lurking. I leaned against the cold stone wall, my legs threatening to give out beneath me. The cuts and scrapes from my frantic flight were starting to throb, a dull counterpoint to the pounding of my heart. "This can't be happening," I whispered to myself, my voice hoarse and shaky. "This can't be real." But the pain in my body and the lingering scent of the creature's breath told me otherwise. Whatever I had seen, whatever had chased me through these dark passages was all too real. As I stood there trying to gather my wits and figure out my next move, one thought kept repeating in my mind. I had to get out of this cave. I had to find my way back to the surface, back to safety and sanity. With a deep breath, I raised my flashlight and peered down the tunnel in the direction I thought I had come from. The beam revealed nothing but more darkness and twisting passages. Somewhere in that labyrinth, a monster was waiting, and I had no choice but to venture back out there and face it if I ever wanted to see daylight again. My entire world had shrunk to the confines of this narrow crevice. The rough stone pressed against my back, digging into my skin through my torn shirt. I wedged myself as far back as I could, ignoring the sharp edges that threatened to cut into my flesh. In that moment, pain was preferable to what waited on the other side of this rocky sanctuary. I held my breath, my lungs burning with the effort. The creature was out there hunting me. I could hear its heavy footfalls, the scrape of its claws against the cave floor. Each sound sent a fresh wave of terror coursing through my veins. A gust of hot, fetid air wafted past my hiding spot. The stench was indescribable, a nauseating mix of rotting meat and something wild, something feral. I fought the urge to gag, knowing that even the slightest sound could give away my position. "Please," I mouthed silently, my eyes squeezed shut. "Please, just go away." But my silent prayer went unanswered. A low growl rumbled through the cavern, so close that I could feel the vibrations in the rock around me. My heart pounded so hard I was certain the creature must be able to hear it. Massive paws came into view just inches from the entrance to my hiding spot. They were enormous, easily the size of dinner plates, tipped with claws that looked like cruel yellow daggers. I watched, paralyzed with fear, as those paws moved back and forth, searching for me. I pressed myself even further back, ignoring the pain as jagged edges of rock dug into my back. A bead of sweat rolled down my forehead, stinging as it dripped into my eye. I didn't dare move to wipe it away. The paws stopped directly in front of the crevice. I could see matted fur, dark and coarse, covering powerful legs. My gaze traveled upward, past a barrel-like chest, to a face that would haunt my nightmares for years to come. It was like something out of a horror movie, but terrifyingly real. A wolf's muzzle, elongated and filled with razor-sharp teeth, grafted onto an almost human-like skull. But it was the eyes that truly chilled me to my core. Yellow, glowing with an unnatural light, and filled with an intelligence that had no place in an animal's gaze. Those eyes swept back and forth, searching the darkness. I knew that if they found me, if they locked onto my hiding place, it would all be over. Time seemed to crawl by at an agonizing pace. Seconds stretched into minutes, each one an eternity of terror. I remained motionless, afraid to even blink. My muscles screamed in protest, but I ignored them. Movement meant death. The creature sniffed the air, its wet nose twitching. I silently cursed myself for not thinking to mask my scent somehow. But how could I have prepared for something like this? This morning, my biggest concern had been remembering to pack enough trail mix for my hike. Now, I was hiding from a monster that shouldn't exist outside of legends and bad sci-fi channel movies. A massive paw suddenly swiped at the crevice entrance. I bit down on my lip to keep from crying out, tasting blood. Claws raked against the stone, sending sparks flying in the darkness. But the opening was too narrow. The creature couldn't reach me. A roar of frustration shook the cave, so loud that I felt it in my bones. Dust and small pebbles rained down from above as the sound reverberated through the cavern. I squeezed my eyes shut, certain that at any moment those claws would find their mark. But they didn't. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, the paws moved away from my hiding spot. I heard the creature's heavy footsteps receding, punctuated by occasional growls of frustration. Still, I didn't move. This could be a trick, I thought. It might be waiting just out of sight, hoping I'd emerge from my sanctuary. I don't know how long I stayed there, barely breathing, every muscle in my body tensed and ready for flight. The silence of the cave was broken only by the distant drip of water and the pounding of my own heart. Eventually, a new sound reached my ears. A howl, but distant now, echoing from deep within the cave system. The creature's frustrated cry reverberated through the tunnels, slowly fading away. Even then, I waited. My legs had long since gone numb from being crammed into such a tight space. My back was on fire from the pressure of the rocks, but none of that mattered. All that mattered was survival. It wasn't until my flashlight, which had been wedged beside me this whole time, began to flicker that I finally stirred. The dying light jolted me back to reality. I couldn't stay here forever. I needed to find a way out of this nightmare. Slowly, painfully, I began to extricate myself from the crevice. Every movement was agony, my stiff muscles protesting after being held in one position for so long. As I finally emerged, I half expected claws to rake across my back at any moment, but the cavern remained silent and still. I swept my faltering flashlight beam around, searching for any sign of the creature. The cave floor was scuffed and scratched, clear evidence of the beast's presence, but of the creature itself there was no sign. My legs threatened to give out as I took my first tentative steps. I leaned against the cave wall for support, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. "Okay," I whispered to myself, needing to hear a human voice, even if it was my own. "Okay, you're alive. Now you just need to get out of here." But as I looked down the dark tunnel stretching before me, I realized I had no idea which way led to the exit. In my panic, I had lost all sense of direction. For all I knew, I could be deeper in the cave system now than when this nightmare began. The beam of my flashlight flickered again, a stark reminder that my time was limited. Once it died, I would be plunged into total darkness. The thought sent a fresh wave of panic through me. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. I had to think logically. There had to be a way out. I just needed to find it before my light gave out, or before that thing found me again. With one last glance at the crevice that had saved my life, I set off down the tunnel. Each step was an act of will, every shadow a potential hiding place for the monster. But I kept moving. I had to. Somewhere in this labyrinth of stone was the way back to the world I knew. The world where creatures like this didn't exist. The silence that fell over the cave was almost as terrifying as the creature's howls. I strained my ears, listening for any sign of the beast's return. But all I could hear was the pounding of my own heart and the distant drip of water echoing through the cavern. I don't know how long I waited, frozen in place, before I finally gathered the courage to move. Every muscle in my body screamed in protest as I slowly, painfully, extracted myself from the narrow crevice that had been my sanctuary. "Come on," I whispered to myself, my voice hoarse and unfamiliar. "You can do this. You have to do this." I swept my flickering flashlight around the cavern, half expecting to see glowing yellow eyes staring back at me from every shadow. But the beam revealed only rough stone walls and empty darkness. The creature, it seemed, had moved on. For now. Taking a deep breath, I tried to orient myself. In my panic earlier, I had lost all sense of direction. Which way led back to the entrance? I closed my eyes, trying to visualize the twists and turns I had taken during my frantic flight. A distant rumble of thunder, barely audible through the layers of rock, made my decision for me. The storm was still raging outside, which meant the cave entrance couldn't be too far away. I just had to follow the sound. With one last glance at my temporary refuge, I set off down the tunnel that I hoped would lead to freedom. Each step was an act of will, my body begging me to rest, to hide, to do anything but venture back into the monster's domain. The beam of my flashlight danced erratically across the cave walls as I moved, casting long shadows that seemed to reach out with clawed hands. More than once I froze in terror, certain I had seen movement in the darkness. But it was always just a trick of the light, my fear-addled mind playing cruel tricks on me. As I pressed on, I became aware of a new sound, the rush of water, growing louder with each step. Hope surged through me. Water meant an opening to the outside world. It meant escape. I quickened my pace, ignoring the protests of my battered body. The sound grew louder, drowning out even the thunder. As I rounded a corner, I saw why. A torrent of rainwater was pouring into the cave through a narrow opening above, creating a miniature waterfall that cascaded down the rocky walls. The floor of the tunnel had become a rushing stream, the water already ankle-deep and rising quickly. No, I muttered, realizing the danger. If I didn't get out soon, the cave could flood, trapping me herewith. I shook my head, banishing the thought. I had to focus on escape. Gritting my teeth, I waded into the icy water. The current was strong, threatening to sweep my feet out from under me with each step. I clung to the walls for support, my fingers scraping against the rough stone as I fought to keep my balance. Suddenly, my foot slipped on a submerged rock. I went down hard, the flashlight flying from my grip. I watched in horror as it bobbed away, carried by the current, before flickering out entirely. Darkness engulfed me. Panic clawed at my throat as I struggled to my feet, now blind in the pitch-black cave. The roar of the water seemed to come from all directions, disorienting me further. "Help!" I screamed, knowing it was futile but unable to stop myself. "Somebody help me!" My voice echoed back at me, mocking in its emptiness. I was alone in the dark with a monster. I stumbled forward, one hand on the wall, the other stretched out in front of me. The water was up to my knees now, each step a battle against the current. I had no idea if I was heading toward the exit or deeper into the cave system, but I couldn't stop. Stopping meant death. That's when I heard it, a low growl, barely audible over the rush of water. My blood ran cold. It was back. I increased my pace, no longer caring about caution. Pure terror drove me forward, splashing through the rising water with reckless abandon. Suddenly, something huge and solid slammed into me from a side passage. I went down hard, my head cracking against the stone floor. For a moment, stars exploded behind my eyes and I tasted blood. Hot breath washed over my face, reeking of decay. I felt the brush of coarse fur against my skin, heard the click of claws on stone. The creature was on top of me, its weight pinning me to the ground. In that moment, survival instinct took over. I thrashed wildly, my hands finding purchase in matted fur. I pulled, twisted, fought with every ounce of strength I had left. Somehow, miraculously, I managed to slip free. I scrambled to my feet and ran, blind and terrified, in what I hoped was the direction of the exit. The creature's roar of fury shook the very foundations of the cave, spurring me to even greater speed. I don't know how I found it. Maybe it was luck, or some primal instinct guiding me. But suddenly I felt a gust of wind on my face. The cave entrance loomed before me, a slightly lighter patch of darkness against the black. With a final burst of energy, I hurled myself through the opening, out of the suffocating confines of the cave and into the stormy night beyond. Rain lashed at my face as I stumbled down the mountainside, my feet slipping on wet leaves and loose rocks. Behind me, I heard the creature's howl one last time, filled with rage and frustration. But it didn't follow. I ran until my legs gave out, collapsing in a clearing far from the cave. As I lay there, gasping for breath, the full weight of what had happened began to sink in. I had encountered something impossible, something that shouldn't exist outside of nightmares and horror stories, and I had survived. As the adrenaline began to fade, I became aware of the pain radiating through my body. Cuts and bruises from my frantic escape throbbed in time with my racing heart. My clothes were torn and soaked, plastered to my skin by the relentless rain. I knew I needed help. I needed to get off this mountain, to find someone who could treat my injuries and what? Tell them about the monster in the cave. Who would believe me? As I struggled to my feet, preparing for the long trek back to civilization, one thought kept repeating in my mind. This isn't over. Whatever that thing was, it's still out there. And as long as it roamed these mountains, no one was safe. With a final glance back toward Blackwater Cave, now hidden by the darkness and the storm, I set off through the forest. The night was far from over, and I had a feeling the true nightmare was just beginning. The storm raged on, as if nature itself was mirroring the chaos of my nightmare. I stumbled through the dark forest, my lungs burning with each ragged breath. The rain had soaked me to the bone, but I barely noticed the cold. Terror was the only sensation I could process. A blinding flash of lightning split the sky, illuminating the forest in stark, momentary clarity. In that instant, I saw the path ahead, a steep, treacherous descent down the mountainside. It was dangerous, especially in this weather, but I had no choice. Anywhere was better than here with that thing on my heels. As if summoned by my thoughts, I heard it, the sound of splintering wood and rustling leaves growing louder by the second. The creature was coming, crashing through the undergrowth with a single-minded determination that chilled me to my core. "Oh God," I gasped, my voice barely audible over the storm. "Please, no." I ran. There was no plan, no strategy, just blind animal panic driving me forward. Branches whipped at my face as I tore through the forest, leaving stinging welts in their wake. I could taste blood in my mouth, though whether from a split lip or simply from the exertion, I couldn't tell. The ground beneath my feet was treacherous, slick with rain and rotting leaves. More than once I nearly lost my footing, saved only by desperate grabs at passing tree trunks. Each stumble cost me precious seconds, the sounds of pursuit growing ever closer. Another flash of lightning, another glimpse of the path ahead. The embankment I'd seen earlier loomed before me, a near vertical drop shrouded in shadows and mist. In daylight, in good weather, it would have been a challenging descent. Now it looked like suicide. But the alternative, a bone-chilling howl pierced the night, so close it felt like it was inside my head. I spun around, my heart threatening to burst from my chest. There, at the edge of the small clearing I'd just exited, I saw it. Yellow's eyes gleamed in the darkness, filled with a predatory intelligence that had no place in an animal's gaze. As I watched, frozen in terror, it took a step forward. Lightning flashed again, illuminating its massive form. It was worse than I remembered. Matted fur clung to a body that seemed to blend the worst aspects of man and beast. Muscles rippled beneath that shaggy coat, tensed and ready to spring. But it was the face that would haunt me forever. A horrifying blend of human and wolf features, its muzzle pulled back in a snarl to reveal rows of razor-sharp teeth. Our eyes met, and in that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that this creature wanted nothing less than my complete destruction. Self-preservation kicked in. Without conscious thought, I turned and hurled myself down the embankment. It was less a controlled descent and more a headlong tumble. I rolled and slid down the steep incline, my world becoming a dizzying blur of mud, leaves, and driving rain. Somewhere above, I heard the creature's roar of frustration, followed by the sound of it giving chase. But gravity was on my side for once. I was falling faster than it could pursue. My wild descent came to an abrupt and painful halt as I slammed into the trunk of a fallen tree. For a moment I lay there, dazed and winded. Every part of my body screamed in protest, but the adrenaline coursing through my veins dulled the pain to a distant throb. I struggled to my feet, swaying unsteadily. The world spun around me, and I tasted bile in the back of my throat. Concussion, probably, but I couldn't stop. Not now. Keep moving, I muttered to myself, the words slurred and barely coherent. Don't stop, can't stop. I staggered forward, using trees for support. Behind and above me, I could hear the creature making its way down the embankment. It was slower, more cautious in its descent, but still coming. Always coming. Another howl split the night, closer than ever. The sound sent a jolt of energy through my battered body. I picked up my pace, ignoring the protests of my aching muscles. That's when I saw it. Through a break in the trees, barely visible through the sheets of rain. Lights. The warm yellow glow of civilization. A small town nestled in the valley below. Hope surged through me, giving me strength I didn't know I had left. Safety, people, help. If I could just reach those lights, maybe I'd have a chance. I ran with renewed vigor, my eyes fixed on those distant beacons of hope. The forest began to thin out, the ground becoming less treacherous underfoot. I was getting closer, but so was the creature. I could hear it now, not bothering with stealth anymore. It crashed through the underbrush behind me, its growls a constant, terrifying soundtrack to my flight. My foot caught on an exposed root, sending me sprawling. I hit the ground hard, the impact driving what little air remained from my lungs. For a moment I lay there, gasping like a landed fish. "Get up," a voice screamed in my head. "Get up or you're dead." I rolled onto my back, looking up just in time to see a dark shape hurtling towards me through the rain. The creature had found me. Time seemed to slow. I could see every detail with horrifying clarity. The flexing of powerful muscles, the glint of teeth, the murderous gleam in those inhuman eyes. This was it. This was how I died. But some primal instinct took over. At the last possible second, I threw myself to the side. I felt the rush of air as the creature sailed past me, its claws raking the ground where I had been a heartbeat before. I scrambled to my feet and ran. I didn't look back. I couldn't afford to. Every ounce of my being was focused on those lights, now tantalizingly close. The sounds of pursuit faded slightly. Had I gained some ground? Or was the creature toying with me, drawing out the hunt for its own sick pleasure? It didn't matter. Nothing mattered except reaching those lights. The trees thinned out further. I could make out individual buildings now. Houses, a gas station, the steeple of a small church. Civilization. Safety. With a final burst of speed, I broke free of the tree line. The rain-slicked asphalt of a road stretched before me, leading directly into town. Behind me, at the edge of the forest, I heard one last, furious howl. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. Not until I reached those lights, not until I found help. Because even as relief flooded through me at the sight of the town, a chilling thought wormed its way into my mind. What if the nightmare wasn't over? What if reaching the town was just the beginning of a whole new horror? With that terrifying possibility spurring me on, I ran towards the lights of the town, praying that I would find safety and answers within its borders. The rain-slicked asphalt stung my bare feet as I stumbled into the outskirts of what I would later learn was called Millbrook. My shoes had been lost somewhere in the forest during my frantic escape. The tiny mountain community was barely more than a collection of buildings huddled together against the wilderness. But to me, it might as well have been a shining metropolis. It meant people. It meant safety. Or so I hoped. Street lamps cast pools of yellow light on the empty sidewalks. The storm that had been raging all night seemed to have driven everyone indoors. As I limped down the main street, my eyes darted from shadow to shadow, half expecting to see glowing yellow eyes staring back at me. My breath came in ragged gasps and my whole body shook with a mixture of exhaustion, cold, and lingering terror. I needed help. I needed someone to believe me about what I'd seen in those woods. A neon sign flickered in the distance. Joe's Diner. Open 24 hours. It was like a beacon of hope in the darkness. Without hesitation, I made for it as fast as my battered body would allow. I burst through the diner's doors with such force that the little bell above nearly flew off its mount. The handful of patrons inside, a couple of truckers at the counter, an elderly couple in a booth, and a group of teenagers huddled over coffee, all turned to stare at me in shock. I must have been quite a sight. Soaked to the bone, covered in mud and leaves, with cuts and bruises visible on every exposed bit of skin. Blood from a gash on my forehead had run down my face, mixing with the rain to create a gruesome mask. "Please," I gasped, my voice hoarse and barely recognizable. "You have to help me. There's something out there in the woods." The waitress behind the counter, a middle-aged woman with graying hair, was the first to react. She hurried around the counter, concern etched on her face. "Good Lord, honey, what happened to you?" she asked, guiding me to a nearby booth. "Margie, get the first aid kit from the back," she called to another waitress. I collapsed into the booth, my legs finally giving out. The adrenaline that had kept me going was fading fast, leaving me shaky and disoriented. "Monster," I mumbled, my teeth chattering. "In the cave. It chased me. All night, you have to believe me." The diner had gone eerily quiet. I could feel the weight of everyone's stares. "What's he talking about, Doris?" one of the truckers at the counter asked. "I don't know, Earl," the waitress, Doris, replied. She turned back to me, her voice gentle but tinged with skepticism. "Honey, you're not making any sense. Did you have an accident in the woods, fall down a ravine maybe?" I shook my head violently, immediately regretting it as the room spun. "No, you don't understand. It was real. Huge. Like a wolf, but not. It stood on two legs. It chased me through the cave, through the forest. I barely got away." One of the teenagers snickered. "Dude's totally tripping," he whispered to his friends, not quite quietly enough. "I'm not on drugs," I shouted, slamming my fist on the table. The sudden movement sent a jolt of pain through my battered body, and I groaned. Doris placed a calming hand on my shoulder. "Easy now. Nobody's saying you are. But you're hurt and not thinking straight. We need to get you to a doctor." "No," I protested. "You have to listen. It's still out there. We need to warn people. Call the police, the army. Someone." The bell above the door jingled again. A tall man in a sheriff's uniform stepped in, shaking rain from his hat. "What's all the commotion, Doris?" he asked, his eyes quickly finding me. His expression hardened as he took in my bedraggled state. "Sheriff Thompson," Doris said, relief evident in her voice. "This young man just came in. He's pretty banged up, talking about some kind of monster in the woods." The sheriff approached slowly, his hand resting casually on his holstered gun. "Is that right?" he asked, his voice gruff. "Want to tell me exactly what you saw, son?" I took a deep breath, trying to organize my thoughts. I was hiking, got caught in the storm, found a cave, Blackwater Cave. There was something in there, huge, like a wolf, but it walked on two legs, yellow eyes. It chased me. All night, through the cave, through the forest. I thought I was going to die. Sheriff Thompson's expression remained impassive, but I could see the skepticism in his eyes. "Blackwater Cave, huh? That's a good 10 miles from here. You're saying you ran all that way?" "Yes," I exclaimed. "I had to. It was right behind me the whole time." The sheriff exchanged a look with Doris. "Son, we get a lot of hikers through here. Sometimes they get lost, get scared. The mind can play tricks on you in the dark." "It wasn't a trick," I insisted, desperation creeping into my voice. "It was real. You have to believe me." "What I believe," the sheriff said slowly, "is that you've had a rough night and need medical attention. Doris, call Doc Peterson. Tell him we've got an injured hiker." No, you don't understand, I pleaded, trying to stand up. My legs buckled and I had to grab the table for support. It's still out there. We need to warn people, to do something. Sheriff Thompson placed a firm hand on my shoulder, pushing me gently back into the booth. The only thing we need to do right now is get you looked at. Then we can talk about what really happened out there. I could see it in his eyes, in the eyes of everyone in the diner. They didn't believe me. To them, I was just some poor, deluded hiker who'd had a bad fall or a vivid nightmare. As the adrenaline faded and the full weight of my ordeal settled over me, doubts began to creep in. Had I imagined it all? Could the sheriff be right? But no. The terror had been too real. The creature too vivid. I slumped in the booth, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. You don't believe me, I muttered. We believe you've been through something, son, Sheriff Thompson said, his voice softening slightly. But monsters? In our woods? That's a bit much to swallow without some hard evidence. Evidence. Of course. In my panic, I hadn't thought to look for any physical proof of my encounter. No photos, no fur samples, nothing but my own battered body and wild story. As I sat there, surrounded by the concerned but disbelieving faces of the Millbrook residents, a chilling thought occurred to me. If no one believed me, if there was no evidence, what was to stop that creature from striking again? And worse, what if it followed me here, to this unsuspecting town? The sound of approaching sirens cut through the patter of rain outside. Help was coming, but not the kind I truly needed. As the diner's patrons murmured among themselves, casting furtive glances my way, I realized that my ordeal was far from over. The monster might be gone for now, but the real challenge was just beginning. How could I make them believe me? And more importantly, how could I protect these people, and myself, if that thing decided to come looking for its escape? The first rays of dawn were just beginning to peek over the mountains as Sheriff Thompson's cruiser rumbled down the winding forest road. I sat in the passenger seat, my hands clenched tightly in my lap, every muscle tense with anticipation and fear. The events of the previous night felt like a fever dream, but the cuts and bruises covering my body were a constant throbbing reminder of their reality. You sure about this? Sheriff Thompson asked for what felt like the 100th time. His voice was gruff, tinged with equal parts concern and skepticism. Doc Peterson said you should be resting, not traipsing back into the woods. I swallowed hard, fighting back the wave of nausea that threatened to overwhelm me. Whether it was from the concussion or sheer terror, I couldn't tell. I have to show you, I insisted. You'll see. There has to be some evidence left behind. The sheriff grunted non-committally, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. I could tell he was humoring me, probably hoping this little expedition would put an end to my wild stories once and for all. As we neared the trailhead that led to Blackwater Cave, my dread grew with each passing moment. What if the creature was still there, waiting? What if it attacked again? Or worse, what if we found nothing at all? This is as far as we go by car, Sheriff Thompson announced, pulling off to the side of the road. He killed the engine and turned to face me, his expression serious. Now listen here. We're going to walk up to this cave of yours, take a look around, and then head straight back. No heroics, no running off. You stay by my side the whole time. Understood? I nodded, not trusting my voice to remain steady if I spoke. The hike up to Blackwater Cave was agonizingly slow. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves sent my heart racing. I kept expecting to see glowing yellow eyes peering at us from the undergrowth, to hear that bone-chilling howl echo through the trees. But the forest remained stubbornly, almost mockingly, peaceful. When we finally reached the cave entrance, I hesitated. The gaping maw of darkness seemed to taunt me, daring me to step inside and relive my nightmare. Sheriff Thompson placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. You okay, son? We don't have to do this if you're not up for it. His words stung my pride. I couldn't back down now. Not when I was so close to proving I wasn't crazy. Steeling myself, I took a deep breath and stepped into the cave. The beam of the sheriff's flashlight cut through the gloom, revealing nothing. No claw marks on the walls, no signs of struggle. Just a normal, unremarkable cave. "I don't understand," I mumbled, my voice echoing in the emptiness. It was right here. There were scratches all over the walls. And the water. There was so much water rushing in. Sheriff Thompson swept his light around, his brow furrowed. "I'm not seeing any flood damage, son. And these walls look pretty untouched to me." I stumbled deeper into the cave, my eyes darting frantically from wall to wall. No, it has to be here somewhere. The crevice I hid in, the passage where it chased me. But as we explored further, it became painfully clear that the cave bore no resemblance to the nightmare labyrinth of my memories. There were no twisting passages, no hidden chambers, just a simple, shallow cavern that dead-ended after about 50 feet. "I think we've seen enough," Sheriff Thompson said gently, placing a hand on my arm. "Let's head back to town." The walk back to the cruiser was a blur. My mind raced, trying to reconcile my vivid memories with the lack of evidence before my eyes. Had I imagined it all? Was I losing my mind? As we drove back into Millbrook, I could feel the weight of the sheriff's sideways glances. When we pulled up in front of the local clinic, he turned to me with a sigh. "Look, son," he began, his tone careful. "I don't know what happened to you out there last night. Maybe you had a fall, hit your head harder than you thought. But I think it's clear there's no monster running around our woods." I opened my mouth to protest, but he held up a hand to stop me. "I'm not calling you a liar. I believe you believe what you saw was real. But facts are facts. There's no evidence of any creature, no flood damage, nothing to back up your story." As we entered the clinic, I could feel the eyes of the townsfolk on me. Word had spread fast in this small community, and it was clear from their expressions what they thought of the crazy hiker with his tales of monsters. Dr. Peterson emerged from an examination room, his kindly face creased with concern. "Ah, there you are. I hope that little field trip didn't aggravate your injuries. Come on, let's get you checked out properly." As the doctor led me away, I caught snippets of hushed conversation behind me. Poor guy. Must have really knocked his head good. Monsters in Blackwater Cave? What'll they come up with next? Bet he was on something. You know how these city folk are. Their words stung, but not as much as the growing doubt in my own mind. If there was no evidence, if the cave was normal, what had I really experienced last night? As I lay on the examination table, wincing as Dr. Peterson prodded my various injuries, a chilling thought occurred to me. What if the creature was real, but far more cunning than I had imagined? What if it had somehow covered its tracks, erased all signs of its existence? And if that were true, what was stopping it from striking again? The thought sent a shiver down my spine. I may have survived my encounter with the beast, but I realized my ordeal was far from over. Somehow I had to find a way to prove what I had seen, to make these people believe me before it was too late. But as I caught sight of my wild-eyed reflection in a nearby mirror, I had to wonder, did I even believe myself anymore? The ride back to Millbrook was silent and tense. I slumped in the passenger seat of Sheriff Thompson's cruiser, my mind reeling from the fruitless investigation at Blackwater Cave. Every bump in the road sent jolts of pain through my battered body, a stark reminder of the ordeal I'd been through, an ordeal that now seemed increasingly difficult to prove. As we rolled into town, I could feel the weight of curious stares from passers-by. News traveled fast in a small community like this, and I had no doubt that tales of the crazy hiker had already made the rounds. Sheriff Thompson cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "Look, son," he began, his tone a mixture of concern and exasperation. "I know you've been through something rough, but you've got to understand how this looks from our perspective." I nodded mutely, too drained to argue. What could I say? The cave had been empty, devoid of any evidence to support my wild story. The cruiser pulled up in front of the local clinic. "Doc Peterson wants to give you a thorough checkup," the sheriff explained. "After that, we'll figure out where to go from here." The small waiting room fell silent as we entered, all eyes turning to me. I caught snippets of hushed conversations as Sheriff Thompson led me to an examination room. "That's him. Talking about some kind of monster. Poor guy must have really lost it out there." Dr. Peterson, a kindly-looking man in his 60s, greeted us with a reassuring smile. "Ah, there you are. Let's have a look at you, shall we?" The examination was thorough, punctuated by the doctor's concerned hums and gentle questions. Finally, he sat back, removing his stethoscope. "Well, young man," he began, his tone carefully neutral. "You've certainly been through the ringer. Multiple contusions, mild dehydration, and I'm concerned about that bump on your head." I leaned forward eagerly. "So you believe me? About what happened in the cave?" Dr. Peterson exchanged a quick glance with Sheriff Thompson before answering. "What I believe," he said slowly, "is that you experienced something traumatic. But the human mind is a complex thing. Under extreme stress, especially combined with exhaustion and possible head trauma, it's not uncommon for people to experience vivid hallucinations." "Hallucinations?" I repeated, my voice hollow. "You think I imagined it all?" "Not imagined exactly," the doctor clarified. "Your brain was likely trying to make sense of a confusing and frightening situation. The monster could have been your mind's way of processing the very real danger you were in." I wanted to protest, to insist that what I'd seen had been real. But doubt had taken root, feeding on the lack of evidence and the skepticism surrounding me. "What happens now?" I asked, suddenly feeling very small and very alone. Sheriff Thompson stepped forward. "There's a motel just down the street. Why don't you get some rest, clear your head? We can talk more tomorrow if you'd like." The implication was clear. They wanted to keep an eye on me, the unstable outsider. The Millbrook Motel was a small, dated establishment that had seen better days. The desk clerk eyed me warily as I checked in, no doubt having heard the rumors. My room was sparse but clean, with a view of the forest's edge in the distance. As the day wore on, I paced the small room, replaying the events of the past night over and over in my mind. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those glowing yellow orbs, heard that bone-chilling howl. But had it been real? Or was my mind fracturing, unable to cope with what? What had really happened to me out there? Night fell, casting long shadows across the room. I stood by the window, staring out at the darkened tree line. The forest seemed to loom closer, more menacing in the twilight. That's when I heard it. A low, guttural growl, barely audible but unmistakable. My heart leaped into my throat as I pressed closer to the glass, straining to see into the shadows. There, a flicker of movement at the forest's edge, 2 pinpricks of yellow light gleaming in the darkness, watching, waiting. I stumbled back from the window, my breath coming in ragged gasps. It was here. It had followed me. But how? Why? With trembling hands, I reached for the room's phone. Who could I call? Who would believe me? As I lifted the receiver, the growl came again, louder this time. Close. Too close. I froze, the phone clutched to my chest as a new, terrifying realization dawned on me. I wasn't just fighting to prove my sanity anymore. I was fighting for my life, and no one in this town would believe me until it was too late. My heart pounded in my chest as I peered through the thin motel curtains, my eyes straining against the darkness. There, in the dimly lit parking lot, I saw them. 2 piercing yellow eyes, unmistakable and terrifying. They seemed to glow with an otherworldly light, fixed directly on my window. No, 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 I muttered, stumbling backward. This can't be happening. But it was. The creature had followed me. It had tracked me all the way from Blackwater Cave to this small town. The realization hit me like a physical blow, leaving me gasping for air. I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip it. Who could I call? The sheriff? Dr. Peterson? Would anyone even believe me? As I scrolled through my contacts, a movement outside caught my eye. The yellow eyes were moving, weaving between the parked cars with a predator's grace. It was coming closer. Panic surged through me. I couldn't stay here. I had to run, had to find help. Without thinking, I grabbed my jacket and bolted for the door, not even bothering to lock it behind me. The cool night air hit me as I burst out of the motel, momentarily disorienting me. Which way? Where could I go? The sheriff's office. It was my best chance. I took off down the deserted main street, my footsteps echoing loudly in the eerie silence. The town seemed abandoned, every storefront dark and shuttered. Had everyone gone to bed already, or was something more sinister at play? As I ran, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every shadow seemed to move, every rustle of leaves made me flinch. Was it right behind me? Was I already too late? I rounded a corner, the sheriff's office finally coming into view. My relief was short-lived, however, as I realized the building was dark. The first rays of dawn crept through the threadbare curtains of my motel room, rousing me from a fitful, nightmare-plagued sleep. For a moment, I lay there, disoriented, the events of the past 2 days swirling in my mind like a surreal fever dream. But as consciousness fully took hold, so did the sickening realization that this was no dream. The terror, the disbelief, the lingering dread, it was all horrifyingly real. I stumbled to the window, half expecting to see the peaceful, skeptical town I'd encountered yesterday. What greeted me instead sent a jolt of ice through my veins. Chaos. Pure, undeniable chaos. Main Street, visible from my second-floor vantage point, looked like a war zone. Cars lay overturned, their metal frames twisted and rent as if by giant claws. Store windows gaped emptily, shards of glass glittering on the sidewalks. Here and there, shell-shocked residents wandered aimlessly, their faces mask of confusion and fear. "Oh, God," I whispered, my breath fogging the glass. It really happened. I threw on my clothes and raced downstairs, bursting out onto the street. The air was thick with the acrid smell of smoke and something else, something wild and musky that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "Hey," I called out to a dazed-looking man standing near an overturned pickup truck. "What happened here?" He turned to me, his eyes wide and unfocused. "Don't rightly know," he mumbled. "Some kind of animal attack, they're saying. But I ain't never seen no animal do something like this." I pushed past him, my heart pounding. As I moved down the devastated street, I began to notice details that sent chills down my spine. Deep gouges in the asphalt, as if made by massive claws. Tufts of coarse, dark fur caught on jagged edges of broken glass. And everywhere, that unmistakable, musky scent. "You there, stop!" I whirled around to see Sheriff Thompson jogging towards me, his face haggard and drawn. He'd clearly been up all night. "I told you," I blurted out as he approached. "I told you it was real. The creature, the monster, it was all true." The sheriff's expression hardened. "Now you listen here," he growled, grabbing my arm. "We've got enough problems without you stirring up more panic. Whatever did this, mountain lion, bear, whatever, it's long gone now." I yanked my arm free, incredulous. "Are you serious? Look around you. Does this look like the work of a bear to you?" Before he could respond, a commotion erupted further down the street. We both turned to see a crowd gathering around something. Without hesitation, I took off running, the sheriff's shouts fading behind me. I pushed my way through the murmuring onlookers, my breath catching in my throat as I saw what had captured their attention. There, embedded in the soft earth of a destroyed flower bed, was a massive paw print. But this was no ordinary animal track. It was huge, easily twice the size of a man's hand, with distinct claw marks that sent shivers of recognition through me. "That's it," I whispered, more to myself than anyone else. "That's what chased me." A hand clamped down on my shoulder, spinning me around. Sheriff Thompson's face was a mask of barely contained fury. "That's enough out of you," he hissed. I don't know what game you're playing, but... His words were cut off by a piercing scream from somewhere down the street. We both turned, watching in horror as people began to run, pointing towards the edge of town where the forest began. And there, just for a moment, I saw it. A massive dark shape, moving with unnatural speed and grace as it melted back into the tree line. Even from this distance, I could feel the weight of its gaze, those glowing yellow eyes searing into my soul. Did you see that? I grabbed the sheriff's arm, my voice cracking. Tell me you saw it. But when I turned to him, his face was pale, his eyes wide with a fear he couldn't quite mask. I don't know what I saw, he stammered. The town was buzzing now, a hornet's nest of fear and confusion. Everywhere I looked, people were shouting, crying, demanding answers that no one seemed able to provide. I caught snatches of frantic conversations, biggest damn wolf I've ever seen. Standing on its hind legs, I swear to God. We need to call in the National Guard or something. I felt a dizzying mix of vindication and terror. They had seen it. Maybe not all of them. Maybe not clearly. But enough to know that something was terribly, horribly wrong in Millbrook. As emergency vehicles began to arrive, their sirens cutting through the growing pandemonium, I found myself being herded along with other residents towards the town hall. The sheriff was shouting orders, trying to maintain some semblance of control, but I could see the doubt and fear in his eyes. Inside the crowded building, the air was thick with tension and wild theories. I stood apart, my mind racing. They had seen it now, yes, but would they believe? Would they understand the true nature of the threat they faced? And more importantly, what would happen when night fell again? As the mayor took to the makeshift podium, trying to calm the panicked crowd, I caught a glimpse of movement outside the window. Just for a second, I could have sworn I saw a pair of yellow eyes gleaming in the shadows of a nearby alley. My blood ran cold as the terrible truth sank in. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The creature was still out there, watching, waiting. And somehow I knew with bone-deep certainty it was far from finished with this town. Or with me.